This video is made possible by Shaker and Spoon. Shaker and Spoon send out a cocktail box each month with the ingredients needed to make bar-quality cocktails in your own home. Get $20 off your first box by going to shakerandspoon.com/biographics. There's a link below. To some, Mao Zedong was a much-loved revolutionary hero who saved China from the rule of foreign aggressors. He modernized China by bringing the wonders of Western industrialization to their shores. To others, though, he is remembered for being a sociopathic tyrant who sacrificed the lives of millions of people in order to bring his political experiment to life. In the video today, the life of the chairman. A farmer and landowner named Mao Yichang was a self-made man. He was born into poverty, but he worked hard and saved enough to buy 2 acres of rice paddies. Over the years, he employed workers to tend the land for him, and most of his profits went back into expanding his farm. He built a comfortable life for his wife, Wen Shimei, and their future children. Sadly, his wife had difficulty getting pregnant, and she lost her first 2 children during infancy. She gave birth to her only child, Mao Zedong, in 1883. Growing up, Mao Zedong lived a very comfortable life compared to his peers. It was not uncommon for Chinese children to walk around without shoes and wear clothes that were in tatters. They barely had enough food to eat, and they could not afford proper healthcare. The fact that Mao Zedong's parents could afford to provide all of the basic necessities for their child is why some people considered them to be wealthy. The one thing that Mao Zedong had in common with all other children in China, though, was that he was taught the religion and philosophy of Confucianism. One of his most well-known teachings is that everyone should try to go with the flow and balance the energy of yin and yang. When it came to the government, Confucius said that people should try to be satisfied with their lot in life, and they should know their place in order for society to run smoothly. Confucius said, "There is government when the prince is prince and the minister is minister, when the father is father and the son is son." However, Mao Zedong did not agree with everything Confucius taught. After all, he knew from first-hand experience that his father was able to work his way out of poverty. He wanted to believe that he could grow up to be more than just a farmer's son. In school, Mao Zedong was one of the top students in his class, and he loved reading as many books as he could get his hands on. But at 13 years old, his parents, they removed him from his elementary school in order to help his father work on the farm. His father tried to arrange a marriage with a young girl named Luo Yigu, who was the daughter of a nearby farmer and landowner. This would have ended his education and completely sealed his fate, so he refused to marry her. At 16 years of age, he convinced his parents that he wanted to be an intellectual, and his parents agreed to send him to a boarding school in the city of Changsha. When he was in this city, he met other like-minded people who believed that there was a need to change the Chinese way of life. In the 1800s, China was seeing more and more trade from Western countries. From 1840 to 1842, China and Great Britain, they had a big conflict known as the Opium Wars, and China lost. After signing the Treaty of Nanking, Hong Kong became a British territory, and European traders now had access to Chinese ports. Even though this was a peace treaty, the Chinese people nicknamed this the Unequal Treaties because it appeared as though the Qing dynasty was bowing to the demands of Great Britain. China was far from being an industrialized nation. Their technology was so far behind the rest of the world, it was far too easy for Western countries to take advantage. In 1895, Japan attempted to overpower China and their influence over Korea, and this was known as the First Sino-Japanese War. The cherry on top of an already bad situation came in the year 1908, when the emperor passed away and the only male heir to the Qing dynasty was a 2-year-old named Pu Yi. It's not a surprise that people began to lose their faith in the strength of the dynasty. In 1911, when Mao Zedong was 18 years old, the Xinhai Revolution happened, and the People's Republic of China brought an end to the Qing dynasty. After switching to the People's Republic, the overarching government was called the Kuomintang, also known as the Nationalist Party or the KMT. The Kuomintang allowed warlords to rule over their respective territories across China. Each warlord had the power to create their own laws, charge taxes, and raise their own armies. As a university student, Mao Zedong's favorite subject was philosophy. He read The Wealth of Nations by Adam Smith and The Spirit of Laws by Montesquieu. He also read all of the works of the Chinese revolutionaries who were behind the People's Republic. During this time, he created the Association for Student Self-Government at Hunan First Normal University so that students could have a voice to protest against the school rules. He also formed a student volunteer army. The group had around 80 members, and they all shared their ideas on government and philosophy. It was during this time that Mao Zedong was introduced to the work of Karl Marx. Out of all the political philosophies they studied, he and his friends agreed with the ideas of communism. And this was because it promised that every person in society would have their basic needs met. Mao Zedong continued to excel in school, and he was number 3 in his graduating class. He got a job at Beijing University as a librarian, where he was able to read as many books as his heart desired. The Communist Party of China, or CCP, was established in 1921. One of the founders, Li Dazhao, was a librarian at Peking University. The other was Chen Duxiu, who was an intellectual who had been a part of establishing the People's Republic of China. After seeing how China adjusted to the new republic, Duxiu believed that the warlords were taking advantage of the peasant class and that the political system needed adjusting. He thought communism would actually be better for their society. Mao Zedong was just 28 years old at the time, and he was one of the many young people who began attending communist meetings after work. Once people began to learn about the teachings of Karl Marx, the Communist Party of China gained a huge following. Many peasant people were unhappy with their respective warlords, and they wanted a new system of government. Of course, communism was posing a huge threat to the Nationalist Party. Unlike the rest of the parties in the Republic, communism actually had the potential to spread across the entire country and replace them as the leading party. They believed it was time to get rid of the communists in China before they gained too much power. In 1927, a gang working for the KMT attacked and killed members of the Communist Party. They announced the plan to eradicate every single member of the CCP. This event is remembered as the Shanghai Massacre or the April the 12th Purge. Over 300,000 communists were killed and 50,000 people denounced their party affiliation out of fear. The Shanghai Massacre is credited for starting the Chinese Civil War. Since the KMT was the original party of the Republic of China, they felt that it was time for them to eliminate the feudal system of warlords and the communists as well, in order to unite all of China under one government. In 1931, when Mao Zedong was 48 years old, he was elected as the chairman of the Communist Party. In 1934, the Chinese Civil War was still raging on. Mao Zedong led the members of the Communist Party in what is remembered as the Long March. They trekked over 4,000 miles through mainland China in their attempt to fend off KMT forces. The leader of the Nationalist Party, Chiang Kai-shek, was sending troops after the communists, and he ran several campaigns in his attempt to defeat them. Mao Zedong did not have an army as large as the KMT, but he had his charisma. Wherever they went, he used his power of persuasion to tell the villagers that communism would improve their lives. He promised them that they would never go hungry again. People were so unhappy living under the rule of their warlords that it wasn't very hard to convince people to fight for the cause. After losing thousands of men in battle, Zedong would just restock his army with new peasants in the next village and just keep on marching forward. In 1937, all of China would have to hit pause on their civil war because Japan was taking advantage of the chaos by invading Manchuria. This was known as the Second Sino-Japanese War. For years, Japan had attempted to take over Chinese territories. The Japanese, they tortured, they killed, they raped Chinese civilians everywhere, and they went and decimated the Chinese major cities. The armies of the warlords in the KMT, they were already weakened from the losses they sustained while fighting each other. There was no way they could fend off the Japanese Empire on their own. The leader of the KMT, Chiang Kai-shek, had to swallow his pride and ask the Communist Party for help. Their Red Army was growing in numbers. They defended China against the Japanese in what is known as the 100 Regiments Offensive. The Red Army was largely made up of peasants who didn't have time for proper military training, so Mao Zedong used guerrilla warfare tactics. They also called in some help of the USSR, who closed in on Japanese-occupied Manchuria from the side while China was on the other. They succeeded in saving the country. However, once the Japanese were gone, the Civil War, it was back. In 1946, Mao Zedong and his Red Army defeated the KMT and became the new rulers of China. At this point, people thought Mao Zedong was a national hero and the rightful leader of their country. Not only did he save them from the Japanese, but he also unified the country under one rule for the first time since the Qing dynasty. People were hopeful that things would finally start to change for the better, but actually, they were going to get a whole lot worse. In 1958, Mao Zedong officially began his plan. This was called the Great Leap Forward. This was his attempt to use communist ideals to bring modern industrialization to China. He might have had the best intentions at heart, but no matter how many books one may read about creating a new society, there is a huge difference between theory and actually doing something in real life. The Great Leap Forward created a major land reform where citizens were no longer allowed to own private property. Farmers had to give up their land to the greater good of the public. They still had to work, but they were not allowed to keep the food they were growing because the rules dictated that people who were far more important to society deserved nourishment first, and that the peasants could be fed with whatever was left over. He sent medical services to all Chinese villages, ensuring that all the citizens had healthcare and they were fit enough to do manual labor. He commanded many of the people of China to start constructing factories and new governmental buildings. Most peasants were farmers their entire lives and they had no idea how to work in a factory. Still though, they were expected to produce steel and other industrialized materials. There were so many people now working in factories, it was impossible to properly train or manage everyone. Despite having a lot of issues getting adjusted to the new policy, the plan, it actually worked for a very short window of time. Crop production went up and people were healthier and had more food to eat than ever before. Despite the setbacks, the Chinese people were also able to erect a few modern buildings. This progress, it all came crashing down in less than a year though. This happened in the winter of 1959. Mao Zedong had suggested that farmers grow more grain and this was stored in silos. However, without growing other types of food to store for the winter months, it meant that people were expected to survive only on bread in the winter. The weather that year, it was awful as well. They experienced widespread droughts followed by massive typhoons that caused flooding that destroyed crops. Tigers, leopards and wolves were attacking farmers as they tried to cultivate more land. Therefore, Mao created an anti-pest campaign where he encouraged people to shoot these animals on sight and eat their meat. This pushed tigers and leopards near extinction, and people killed 75% of their population. The Great Leap Forward was actually a huge step backwards for China, and it created a widespread famine that killed millions of people. People resorted to eating household pets like dogs and cats just in order to survive. Some even resorted to cannibalism. In 1959, he was so unpopular that he had to step down as the chairman of the Communist Party, and he handed over his position as state chairman to a more moderate party representative, Li Shaoqi. However, Mao Zedong continued to work in a leading position in the government and tried to run his Great Leap Forward from behind the scenes. Instead of recognizing that his policy was doomed to fail, Mao Zedong was convinced that this was just bad luck and pressed the people to keep going. However, people just continued to die year after year. Finally, in 1961, the Great Leap Forward, it was cancelled. By the time he finally ended the policy, 36 million people had died. You'd think that after being responsible for the deaths of millions of people and somehow not being killed for it, you'd know it was time to quit. But in 1966, Mao Zedong tried to regain the trust of the people and become state chairman once again. He had to place the blame for his mistakes somewhere else. He claimed that the bourgeoisie, the top 1% of society, were ruining everything, and that Mao himself, he was on the side of the peasants. He built up a cult of personality, and people, they strongly supported him again because, well, they remembered him as a revolutionary hero who saved their country from the Japanese and provided them with food rations and free healthcare. His followers, they were willing to do whatever he asked. He knew from his days as a college student that young people were perfect for molding into revolutionaries. He convinced a group of students called the Red Guard to seek out anyone who was speaking out against the Communist Party. He encouraged them to even murder their professors who spoke against Mao's policies just in order to make an example of them. According to some accounts, Mao's Red Guards were so savage they partook in flesh banquets or ritualistic cannibalism of their enemies. Mao Zedong called the USSR and North Korea traitor revisionists who were bastardizing the original work of Karl Marx. His interpretation of communism was so different from the rest of the world that many people called his philosophy Maoism. Instead of isolating his people from the outside world like other communist nations, he encouraged globalization and open trade, which is why China's economy eventually rebounded. And indeed, this actually set the stage for the economic strength that China has today. In 1968, the Minister of Pakistan brought a gift of 40 mangoes to Chairman Mao. People of China had never eaten tropical fruit before, so this was a delicacy to them. Mao couldn't possibly eat 40 mangoes on his own, so he handed out the fruit to his political team, and a couple got in the hands of a group of factory workers. They were so mesmerized by this magical sweet fruit that they literally started to worship it, saying that it was a symbol of the wonderful new things that Chairman Mao would bring to their land. They placed it in a glass case, and when the fruit went bad, they replaced it with a wax replica. One man who had never tried mango before questioned why everyone was worshipping this piece of fruit. He tried to compare it to a sweet potato. He simply couldn't believe that mangoes could taste so great. Well, then it got a little bit ridiculous, because even the mere suggestion that a mango wasn't a magical fruit was enough to kill a man for treason. This is just one of many examples of how irrationally devoted to Mao Zedong people were. In the year 1970, when the country was running low on building supplies, Mao Zedong ordered his workers to tear down the Great Wall of China in order to use the bricks to build new houses and a dam. He also destroyed ancient artwork or anything else that was considered to be a symbol of the bourgeoisie. He was willing to dismantle thousands of years of Chinese history and culture in order to execute his communist vision. When he was getting older, Mao Zedong was shameless when it came to reaping the benefits of being a communist dictator. He almost never bathed or brushed his teeth, and claimed that he cleansed himself inside the bodies of his mistresses. Not surprisingly, he contracted sexually transmitted infections and spread them to several women, who actually wore their illness as something of a badge of honor since it was given to them by Chairman Mao. Yep. When he was in his 60s, he appointed a 16-year-old girl named Zhang Yufeng to be his personal secretary. She spent so much time with him that even Mao Zedong's wife had to go through Zhang Yufeng first before she could make an appointment and speak with her husband. In 1973, he was sitting in a trade meeting with Henry Kissinger, and he reportedly offered to trade 10 million Chinese women to the United States. He said that women caused too many problems and that it would be better to just get rid of them. In 1974, his third wife, the beautiful actress Jiang Qing, decided that she would not sit around waiting for her husband's respect and affection. She began gathering her own collection of young male lovers. She got so bold she would even allow her boyfriends to show up at the house, and Mao never protested against her affairs. When he died in 1976, they were devastated. He was buried in a crystal casket so that people could see his body when they came to visit. Lines of people queued up to pay their respects, and many of them openly cried when they saw the body of their dear leader. Even to this day, the memory of Mao Zedong is revered by many as they remember him as one of the great heroes of the nation. But love him or hate him, China would be a very different place today if it was not for Mao Zedong. Maybe without him, China would have never become a leading economic powerhouse. But maybe without him, millions of people would not have died. So Chairman Mao, not exactly the cheeriest of subjects, but you know what can take the edge off his communist ways? Well, a cocktail. And that's convenient because today's video is brought to you by Shaker and Spoon. Now, I'm not going to mix up some cocktails at work because I'm not Don Draper, so let's, through the magic of television, travel home.
Hello, welcome to my home. Let's make some cocktails. So with Shaker and Spoon, you get 3 cocktails that you get to have a crack at this month. They are the Spice of Life, Tea and Honey, and the Mighty Crake Cobbler. Now, I believe that lets me use one of these dehydrated mandarin wheels. So I'm gonna make this. It's also with Irish whiskey, and I have a bottle of Irish whiskey on hand, so that's a good thing. First step, I need to crush some ice. Now with Shaker and Spoon, It's available in the US. Obviously, I'm not there, so they make special accommodations and send me the stuff internationally, which I really appreciate. They normally ship the fruit with them. I had to buy my own orange, but don't worry, everything you need except for the booze comes in the box. I also worry this orange is absolutely massive. It might not actually fit in my glass. This is a fine looking orange. Good news, I might not need to put them in the glass. I should read the recipe through, I suppose, before I start with these things, but they're too big even for my shaker. This is a ridiculously huge orange. I'm just gonna cut them in half and put them in like that, because apparently my local shop sells mutant oranges. 1.5 ounces of orange spice syrup. This is it. Got myself one of these. I always feel like such a bartender where you like, and it makes that nice ringing sound. Pop that in there. Pop that in there. Gotta muddle that for 6 seconds. You know what's cool? If you don't know what muddling is, it tells you right here. Using a muddler, press fruit or herbs into the bottom of the glass, usually with added sugar or syrup. When muddling, be careful not to destroy the fruit or herbs. You want to release their oil and flavor, not pulverize. I don't have a muddler. I'm pretty sure they sent me a muddler. I think I lost it. I'm sorry. Today we're using some Tullamore Dew. Put that in there. I'm gonna add that all in there. Strain. Oh yeah. Garnish with one of these bad boys. Oh my god. It is super good. Thank you, Shaker and Spoon. I'm sure you can all understand why this is probably one of my favorite sponsorships. You know, lots of useful stuff, but this is the fun stuff. You get $20 off your first box with Shaker and Spoon. See our link in the description below to do that. As always, thank you for watching. Thanks to Shaker and Spoon. Back to the studio.
So that is Shaker and Spoon, and you can get $20 off your first box by going to shakerandspoon.com/biographics. Thanks to Shaker and Spoon for the sponsorship, and thanks to you for watching.